Ebola. Are you scared? Well, you shouldn't be, and I'm here today to tell you why. As of March 2014, there have been many stories concerning Ebola and the outbreak that it's been causing in many countries, mostly in West Africa. But even though it's happening in West Africa, a lot of U.S. citizens' anxiety is growing over the disease, even though it's not really affecting us. Contracting Ebola in the U.S. is, like, the chances are extremely slim as opposed to West Africa because our health care systems are extremely different. And when Ebola first started surfacing, I will admit that I was a bit worried about my health, but after researching the topic and understanding like how difficult it is to contract, I was put to ease on the situation. So after listening to this speech, I hope you all understand that contracting Ebola would be very rare, even in this room or like U.S., even though there have been a couple of cases. So first, I will share with you a history and background on Ebola. Second, how it can be contracted, and finally, the symptoms and its treatments. So first, what is Ebola? In order to get a better grasp of what Ebola is, we must first take a look at the disease's background and history. So Ebola is a hemorrhagic fever that causes a serious illness if it is not properly treated, and it must be cared for immediately if someone has contracted it. Once Ebola enters the body, it weakens the immune system, and Ebola has a protein called BP24 that blocks the blood vessels and creates clots within the blood vessels. And once the blood vessels are like blocked off and blood can't get into important organs, patients' blood pressure begins to drop and they die from organ failure and shock. And Ebola primarily appeared in Central Africa and Southern Sudan in 1976, but as of now, there have been 13,500 cases of Ebola, and that's according to the Center for Diseases and Control Prevention, as of October 30th, 2014. The traveling that occurs within the countries is what's causing Ebola to spread from like country to country, and that's how it even got into the U.S. But as of now, the World Health Organization, they state that Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia, they're the main countries that are affected by Ebola. And as of now, well, it started in Liberia, and that's how it began to spread. And as of now, Liberia has the most deaths at that very border up there. And the reason they've been greatly affected is because they have a weak healthcare system and very low human infrastructural resources, as opposed to America, where we have amazing healthcare system and hospitals that have prepared and even researched how to prevent and even control Ebola once it got to us. Now that we have discussed what Ebola is and where it came from, we are now going to look at our second point, which is contraction. There have been many misconceptions on how Ebola can be contracted. People were believing that it was airborne, when in reality it's not. Like, it's not that simple to get. It is infectious, but it's not contagious, so it's best not to like be so alarmed about it. The CDC director, Tom Frieden, he states that Ebola can be contracted through bodily fluids, like if you touch an infected person's vomit or blood and it somehow gets in your eye or a cut in your skin, that's how it can be contracted. Otherwise, sitting next to someone who has Ebola or sharing food or water with them is not a way to get it, and also mosquitoes are not a cause. You may ask, like, if Ebola is so difficult to contract, then how are people still getting it, even in the U.S.? And that's because healthcare workers as of now, healthcare workers are the ones who have gotten Ebola in the U.S., and that's because they work so closely with patients who do have Ebola. And sometimes they may misuse medical precautions. So, outside of West Africa, there have been 19 cases of Ebola. 12 of those cases have recovered from Ebola. 2 are still in treatment, and only 5 have died. 3 of those infected patients were working with West African patients, and that's how they contracted Ebola. 2 of those healthcare workers contracted Ebola in Dallas when they got it from Thomas Eric Duncan, who was the first Ebola diagnosed patient in the U.S., and Teresa Romero Ramos contracted Ebola from a priest, Miguel Barajes, who also had Ebola while all working in Liberia. So now we talked about what Ebola is, where it came from, and how it can be contracted, and now we're going to move on to the symptoms and treatments. According to the CDC, Ebola symptoms, although they're very vague, like they're not to be taken lightly. Fever's a symptom, muscle pains, abdominal pains, diarrhea, vomiting, headaches. Those are symptoms from Ebola that end up showing up in a time span of 2 to 21 days. And you should know for sure if you have Ebola about like 8 to 10 days. And the treatments include early high-quality treatment, experimental drugs, and plasma transfusion, and quick rehydration. So we went over how to contract Ebola, and how it's contracted, its history, and the symptoms. So to wrap it all up, basically, Ebola is a serious illness, and it's not to be taken lightly, but it's not so serious to the point where you're going to believe everybody does have Ebola that's around you.